money grow? How much sweat is on your brow? How weary are your bones? How much toil to dig this earth, to slash, enslave, and destroy. Just a second. You've used up our great resource. Do you plan to work your goals? Speed it up a little bit. Tell me, Mr. Businessman, is business going well? Can you put your best foot forward as you walk your earthbound hell? Souls are bought and muscles gnawed, and wishes don't come true. You get rich upon our backs and say it's what we choose. It's not our choice. Tell me, Mr. Businessman, tell me what's so rough? What is it that you're giving up that seems to mean so much? How many dollars can you spare? How many acres will divide? How many will be sacrificed before you're satisfied? Tell me, Mr. Businessman, tell me what's so hard? Do you have to pay an army to guard the fence around your yard? Or are you innocent by scale? You've only gardeners for your lawn. But can you make it right? 'Cause it's the lesser of the wrong. Thank you. Thank you. Well, it was tuned when I bought it, but I guess I should take it back. Even skilled trades people coming up short these days. I'm just feeling a joke I wrote when I was in the dawn called Breaking Out.
There's a file in that cake.
There's a file in the cake, that's right. Now, I gotta tell you something about the last song. I wrote that last song about 35, 37 years ago. I hate the fact that it's timeless. This song also I wrote 37, 38, maybe 40 years ago. I also hate the fact that this one's timeless. There's some things we need to do, and I do these workshops. The next one's July the 20th. Check it out, Decolonizing the Heart, Deep Learning for Deep Change. And it's a kind of deep change we need to make so that we don't keep repeating the cycles. It's about breaking the cycles. It's it's about understanding how so many of us in our social justice movements our passion and our empathy comes from our own experiences and our wounds, but a lot of us don't have the opportunity because of the scarcity of healing and services and that kind of thing that support us, that we work from that wound instead of the scar, and then it makes it hard for us to empathize with each other and to empathize with people who we perceive as our enemies when in fact they're not our enemies. They are people that are wounded and don't have space for us either. And that's what this workshop is about, and it's a very important workshop, and I'm offering it really cheaply at $75, $25 to reserve your spot and talk to me, because in reality it's easily a $300 workshop, and in September when we're doing them it's going to be a $300 to $600 workshop and a 4-day seminar, and we're doing them for HR departments and all kinds of things like that, in communities, res communities. So get it where you can, and we wouldn't turn anybody away, but that's the story. Many miles from home we're taught in your fine schools that a history book's a weapon, not a tool. In many voices we try to understand what has come upon this land. Many good intentioned Christians tell us, children, you must listen, or they kill us with their kindness. In God's name they terrorize us. On a starry night in a Central American town, loved ones pray their loved ones won't be found. Well, in the deepest part of a silent night, shots ring out in the dark. Then missing ones will not return, their killers never caught, and in the paper there's a caption, guerrillas killed in action. But they were children, they were only children, and how their mothers cried. On a dusty road by an olive grove they rest, young women with babies at their breasts. Upon the souls who went before them lie beneath the earth, and earth made rich with bloodshed, bloodshed before their births. And on the TV there's a news flash, more victims in the Holy Land. But they were children, they were only children, and all their mothers cried. And it goes on and on, we see it every day. But we don't need the papers, and we don't need the news. We all have the answers, we all share what we all in the capitals of these places they call nations. There are papers pushed and proud, congratulations. And while the victimized are criminalized, are laughed at and are lied to, more plans are laid by the death machine. Will these madmen never tire? No, they kneel and they pray to a materialist savior. But we were children. Once they were children. What made their mothers cry? And where are all the children? Where are all the children? Where are all the children? What makes your mother cry? Little children everywhere, little children stop the wars. Little children everywhere, little children stop the wars. Woo! Thank you. Now, I've done two political songs. I get to do my love song now.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Certainly.
Love is a burden. It'll bring you to your knees. And if you choose to bear it, you better follow where it leads. 'Cause it doesn't matter what you want or think you need. Love is like a hand held tight. It'll squeeze you till you bleed. You know, love isn't stupid, but it'll make you act a fool. It'll lift you up and toss you and pierce you through and through. Love can leave you hanging, hook embedded in your chest. Love is like a hungry child. It'll never let you rest. Love isn't lonely. It's got all kinds of friends. Some will leave you early, some will stay until the end. Love can be a lighthouse, a shelter or a storm. Love can be forever, uncertain or for sure. But if you get a chance, my friend, well, take it while you can. Not everyone is called upon, not everyone so blessed. Love isn't easy. It can sink you like a stone. It's got every feeling in it, every shade, every tone. Love can pick you up and throw you like a dog gets thrown a bone. Love can crack you so wide open that you may never close. And if it's love unanswered, impossible or scorn, think upon that moment when the fire began to glow. And thank you all lucky stars above, you felt it rise and fall. There are so many wounded souls who'll never feel at all. Their love is a burden, it can bring you to your knees. Thank you so much. That's the stuff. That's the stuff. When you get that dopamine running through your brain and all that stuff, that's what happened to me. So here's one last Woody Guthrie tune to send us off into the... It's a mighty hard road that this poor hand's soul. 4 feet of travel, a hot dusty road. Out of your dust bowl and westward to roll. And your deserts were hot, and your hearts, they were cold. I worked in your pastures of peaches and prunes, slept in the ground in the light of your moon. On the edge of your city, you'd see us land. We come with the dust and we go with the wind. California and Arizona, I'd make all your crops. Then north up to Oregon to come on, people know this. You're fucking well, it's always all ramble, that river and I, all along your green valley. We'll work till we die. This land we'll defend with our lives if it be. For these pastures of plenty must always be free. Yes, our pastures of plenty must always be free. Okay. Corey's going to take over. Corey's going to turn this down so I can unplug me. Yeah, I got you.
One more time for Mama D. Thank you, Mama D. Fantastic. That's right. Support the artists. Real dollars. All right. So I'm Corey David. I'm a member of Socialist Action and the Workers' Action Movement. I'm also a machinist apprentice that works up in Vaughan at the metal fabrication plant. Yeah, thank you. Anyways, welcome to Socialism in the Park. I will chair the forum, the third of 3 Wednesday evenings here in Christie, Pittsburgh. Tonight's topic is socialism in Canada. Socialist Action is an organization of revolutionary socialists across the Canadian state. We advance the fight for a workers' agenda by building a class struggle left wing inside our unions and inside the labor-based New Democratic Party through the Socialist Caucus. We work actively in support of the international solidarity, anti-war, anti-poverty, indigenous peoples, feminist, equal socialism, and human rights movements. Year-round, we host rebel films, concert demonstrations, rallies, and educational conferences. On July 1st, Canada Day, in this park, we confronted Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland over a policy on Venezuela. About 50 of us chanted, "Lift the block, hands off Venezuela." And she had to cower behind the bench that she was standing in. We continue this meeting by acknowledging the stewardship of this land. It has been a site of human activity for 15,000 years. It is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between Iroquois Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still a home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to be able to work and live on this territory. Tonight's topic is socialism in Canada, and an introduction to socialism. The presenter is a leading member of SA in the NDP Socialist Caucus and the Workers' Action Movement. He's an Ontario Liquor Board employee and a member of OPSU. Sorry, 1 second. He's from OPSU Local 5108, steward and member at large of the Anti-Privatization Committee of the Liquor Board Employees Division Executive, Sam Cheadle. So if you want to take it away, Sam.
Thank you, Corey, for the excellent introduction. I would sit up on the pig table, but I suffered an injury at work, so my back is a little arched. So good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Over the past 2 weeks, we've had some great discussions. The first was led by our comrade Corey David, young worker, as leading member of Socialist Action, on the origins of class in the state. He spoke about the formation of class society with the advent of organized production and the attendant social questions and type of states and processes these produced. Last week, another SA leading member and labor militant, Julia Sarsgaard, who fortunately can't be here today, spoke about permanent revolution, Stalinism, and the transitional program. So tonight I have the pleasure to talk to you about how can we make socialism become a reality in the Canadian state and beyond. So let's cut to the chase. Capitalism and all the rationality, chaos, and inequality that comes with it is bad. There's only one alternative, and that's a socialist world. Some could say its victory is inescapable. But in other words, there's a meme going around on Facebook right now that captures the tensions of our epoch somewhat succinctly. And basically reads, if you're not a radical in the world where millions of people are starving to death, where 8 people have more wealth than the bottom 50% combined, then what the fuck is wrong with you? So tonight I want to talk to you about the prospects for a socialist transformation of Canadian society and the strategy that we believe in Socialist Action is necessary to advance it. So let's start. What do we mean by socialism? So by socialism we refer to 2 things. Number 1, the idea is a political program associated with the class struggle of workers and allies in the quest for an egalitarian and democratic world. Number 2, the movement in each country to achieve it. Before we go much further, though, it would be helpful to get an overview of what we mean essentially by socialism. So the essence of being a program that says that people should be in control of their own destinies and lives, including the institutions in which we work, the communities in which we live, and so on. This is traditional socialism, in a sense. It means the democratization of all aspects of life, political, economic, social. It is a system in which billions of workers are the masters. A system in which the means of production, distribution, exchange, transportation, and communication, all of these things are under public control. Democratic public control. And democracy is an intrinsic, fundamental, and essential part of socialism, as opposed to bourgeois democracy, which we'll get into later. Socialists believe that we need to break with the capitalist marketplace. We believe that all capitalist private property, not personal property, but private property relations must be abolished. In short, socialists believe that democracy and capitalism are fundamentally incompatible. In the world today, economic activity is significantly determined by investment decisions and private capitalists. Big capitalists can essentially veto or block governmental policies that they think are against their interests. So long as the fundamental structures of the economy remain unchanged, government action will always disproportionately benefit capitalist interests at the expense of everyone else. Economic power is reflected in political power, and under capitalism, the owners of capital will always have the capacity to undermine popular democracy. So, why workers must lead the struggle? I mean, this isn't workers are the central agents of social change. This isn't a case of idealizing workers, but it's based on our structural position in the economy. Labor and nature are the source of all wealth. Workers have the ability to disrupt production, distribution, and exchange. We have a material interest in banding together and articulating our collective demands. This makes workers the key agents of change under capitalism, unlike any other class. Excuse me. This view is often caricatured by liberals and conservatives. They say a focus on the working class ignores the struggles for racial justice, immigrants' rights, against homophobia, for reproductive freedom, environmental protection, and more. Nothing could be further from the truth. The working class in its majority is female and disproportionately racialized and immigrant. This is not to discount courageous struggles ways on the specific issues I just mentioned. They have enormous value, but in terms of constituting a coordinated effort to overthrow capitalism, we often fall short. We have to understand that the next upsurge will have to integrate the fight for free 24-hour childcare, living wages, genuine healthcare reforms that afford real productive justice. And it is only this kind of movement that will signal to women in the LGBTQI community that we understand that remedying their situation is not altruistic, but part of the final battle to take down a capitalist system which organizes not only production, but social reproduction to maintain its undemocratic rule. So the working class has this power, because the capitalists can make their profits only if workers show up to every day. If they stop working, profits dry up pretty quickly. And there's one thing that catches the boss' attention more than anything, is when the money stops flowing. This ability to bring down the entire system, both business and government, just by refusing to work, gives workers a kind of power that no other section of society has. Workers are therefore not only a social group that is systematically oppressed and exploited in modern society, they're also the best positioned to enact real change and exact possessions from the major center of power. The bankers, the big capitalists, the big industrialists that run this system. Being the vast majority of, being the vast majority of modern society, this is more so today than at any time in history. They're also among the poorest workers, and we're also among the poorest globally and the ones who every day suffer indignities, insecurity, the anxiety of what to do with their lives when they're under somebody else's control. Workers are the people that suffer the most under capitalism, but you're also the class that comes into contact with capitalists every day. Workers are the only class that can take on power of the capital and improve their lives, and in turn, the lives of everyone else, by leading this situation. So, the situation in Canada today. So today, we'll be the first to admit the socialist movement inside the Canadian state is not very strong. It is, however, growing. Every day we see more people getting involved in the struggle for a socialist transformation in the world. Why? Because people see the increase in inequality all around us. We see homeless people, the growth of precarious and temporless work. We see numerous incidents related to mental health conditions. We see the rise, not fall, of racist attacks on people of color, increasing, not decreasing, incidents of homophobia, like the fascist attacks on Hamilton Pride and Toronto Pride events, which the police actually cracked down on the Pride defenders, shame, and a serious and very real rise in police violence. These are not isolated incidents, but a fundamental pattern that's part of the system. Yet at the same time, the ideas of social ownership and democratic control are deeply embedded in the population. A large majority of people in the society favor public health care, public education, public transit, public parks, recreation areas, library systems, and a large majority favor publicly regulated high standards for goods and services, such as clean water, safe food, medicine, high standards for the construction of buildings, roads, vehicles of all kinds, children's toys, and so on. All of these amenities are byproducts of socialism and the movement that came before us. They're the fruits of generations of workers' struggles. They are acquisitions won inside a system that is utterly and fundamentally hostile to such gains. So it's precisely that reason that Medicare, Ontario Hydro, Postal Services, and all the rest are under fierce attack exactly at this moment. After all, the capitalist system works to maximize private profit, not to satisfy social needs. So anything that can be squeezed to yield a profit is target for privatization, the monetization. The other reason for attacking social gains is the inherent instability and irrationality of capitalist rule. The boom-bust cycle creates the need to dump social costs and raise the rate of profit. Concerning the overall relationship of class forces, suffice it to say that while the socialist movement is weak, the attachments of the masses to our social gains is strong. In fact, attacks on our social gains have the effect of straining popular confidence in the system. This increases the potential of organized socialists to stimulate social justice struggles, influence mass public opinion, and prepare the basis for revolutionary change when the current system exhausts its political credibility. We're seeing Doug Ford create more socialists and radicals in this way. History teaches three things, above all. Nothing is permanent. Big changes can happen very fast, sometimes quite suddenly, and either we prepare to make history or we're doomed to be the victims of history. As workers have the ability through organization to become actors in history. The concluding session of Socialism in the Park is dedicated to this idea that we can make history by being organized and by avoiding the mistakes of the past. So, what's the nature of the present political period? Business class is on the offensive. Working class people, small farmers, small business, self-employed professionals, along with the aged, infirm, the destitute, are all under a severe and sustained attack by the employers and their governments. You look at a short survey of what I'll refer to as the Doug Ford government's first year in office. We have attacks on healthcare, French language service, indigenous education, the replacement of sex ed curriculum. I know I'm speaking fast on this one, there's a long list. Which amounted to an attack on the LGBTQI community and jeopardizing student safety. That was in the sex ed curriculum. The gutting of variety of labor law reforms, which include the rollback of a planned $15 minimum wage and a small amount of sick days for all workers, which was not huge, but it was substantial for workers who previously had nothing. We have the attacking of autistic children, the racist cutting off of legal aid to refugees, effectively ending their right to due process. We have the scrapping of university grants, construction in the Greenbelt, back to work legislation at York University, Ontario Power Generation, sort of. They legislate them before you can go and strike, and potentially for the bill for the teachers' unions. Under Bill 66, safety regulations on children's toys were even scrapped. And the health and safety and wages of the construction industry, which some of our comrades have recently gone through a round of bargaining fighting, are well underway. There is even the scrapping of the office of the Ontario Child Advocate. And while this list is by no means exhaustive, right? There's 1,000 small programs and other workers and funding that's been cut, but in a ever meaner late capitalist epoch, even a public advocate for vulnerable children is seen as annoying and unnecessary costs. The Canadian post-World War II welfare state is rapidly being dismantled. So what was this Canadian post-World War II welfare state? We had a social contract that came about as after this era. The capitalist class brought peace in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s in exchange for concessions to the working class and the poor in the form of social benefits. The social benefits were funded by a relatively high rate of taxation on business and the rich, but this relationship is now coming under blows. They're starting to rewrite the deal, especially since the end of the post-war economic boom in the 1970s. So, capital demanded tax relief, and governments complied, but rather than suddenly curtail social programs, which would stir up enormous popular anger, governments resorted to debt and deficits. Then the government saddled workers with the debt. Debt and fiscal deficits became the rationale for cutbacks in social expenditures in combination with user fees and higher taxes on working people. To justify a wage freeze, speed up on the job, which capital demanded to raise the rate of profit, the bosses played the card of global competitiveness, telling us to be realistic in our demands, and to quell any continual or regional resistance to capitalist priorities. The big powers intervene by stealth or by overt means to remove non-compliant regimes and governments that try to assert their autonomy. Limited but persistent interventions abroad have grown into permanent wars of occupation and empire consolidation. This is especially visible right now with the wide-open coup attempt on the democratically elected government of Venezuela, something that we were protesting here to Castilla Freeland just the other week. So we bring us to the movement of the labor movement, the movement of the essential movement of the working class, the shell, the structure, the house we live under, the kind of last vestige of kind of our gains in this arena. So the labor leadership has primarily been in retreat. We've all seen this. Primarily to grant concessions to capital and the state. Post-capitalist bureaucrats dominate and lead most of the unions. They wage battles against the boss reluctantly and really only fight when pushed back by the rank and file. The looming specter of right-to-work legislation, which could be on the rise in this era, will show us if what you could call the labor aristocracy has any fight left in it at all, as it essentially is coming for their office funding. With capitalism in a global crisis, the bosses push harder. Why does the union brass make concessions? Well, for a variety of reasons. They lack the confidence in the membership, they fear losing control of the situation where the ranks are set in motion, they fear challenging fundamentally the system itself. So the labor leadership, for the most part, acts as a brake on the workers. The braking action becomes a new norm, and that further undermines confidence. 100 years ago, the American socialist Daniel DeLeon described the labor leadership as what I would say labor lieutenants of capitalism, in a way. It's no less true today. As things got worse, with less room for maneuver on both sides of the bargaining table, the labor brass began to tighten their control of the ranks by curtailing union democracy. This is done by restricting debate, limiting votes on contracts, by manipulating union elections, by amalgamating local workplace bargaining units into giant regional union bodies, which meet very infrequently and which can run according to bureaucratic rules and are dominated by privileged cliques. If you look at UFC 1000A, they have thousands of members, right? And it's unrealistic that they're going to be able to advance any sort of rank and file democracy.
Which union?
UFC 1000A, UCW 1000A. It's a very, very large local, but they're not the only example. I didn't mean to single them out. I don't know if you remember that local one. Okay. No, sorry. Yeah. QP, right? So when employer or bourgeois government actions become too outrageous to ignore, labor leaders will resort to mobilization of the ranks. They mobilize primarily to let off steam rather than challenge or replace those in control levers of power. However, shutting down a massive protest movement can sometimes be worse than mobilizing one in the first place. We need to look no further than the termination of the Ontario Days of Action in 95-97, which one could argue so demoralized the labor movement that Mike Harris and the Tories were easily re-elected in 99. Every sellout of the workers has a ripple effect. We can't let this happen today. The fight against Doug Ford is critical, and if you think things are bad during the Mike Harris years, well, we're in for a much bigger surprise during Doug Ford with his 3 years left. So that brings us to Fordo and Donald Trump, and essentially the products of a failed bourgeois democracy. Let's take a moment to talk about the Ontario government. The election of Doug Ford, like Mike Harris before him and Donald Trump in the United States, is essentially the result of a long process of political, cultural, and social decay. Ford is a product of our failed capitalist democracy. It is a myth that we live in a genuine democracy and that Doug Ford and Donald Trump are somehow just deviations that we can fix in the next election. The more we believe that, the more we turn ourselves towards despotism and devastation. The problem is not Mr. Ford or Trump per se, it's a corrupt political system dominated by corporate power. Workers can take political control by dismantling the corporate state, but this requires massive and sustained process, a movement, strikes, civil disobedience. It requires the building of a revolutionary party capable of leading the working class to power. So now I'm going to talk about NDP and the struggle today. And this is often, where we've been running into some controversy lately, but a track that we feel is important in the movement. So how does the NDP fit in this situation? The NDP is a political arm of the labour movement in English Canada. Its formation is 1961, was the result of the merger of the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation and the Canadian Labour Congress. That merger represented an organizational break by an important section of the workers' movement with the parties of big business in Canada. The break, however, remains incomplete. The leadership of the party and the unions, who are essentially the same people, there's this very big crossover between those two bureaucracies, remain strongly pro-capitalist. In other words, the leadership acts contrary to the class interests of its social base. The base of the NDP's 4 million plus voters, if you count the 120,000 individual party members plus some 350,000 affiliated union members, is overwhelmingly a working class majority. This is true despite the predominance of petty bourgeois and social climbers in the parliamentary caucus and executive bodies. The NDP leadership is caught in a class contradiction. It betrays the aspirations of its social base every time it advocates or legislates social cuts or anti-labor laws or national chauvinist policies. As the crisis of capitalism deepens, the NDP is increasingly torn between the prevailing neoliberal agenda and socialism. The task of socialists is to galvanize resistance to neoliberalism inside the unions and the NDP, where the working class is. Our task is to organize a class struggle opposition to the treacherous leadership of the unions and the NDP. Such an opposition be based on what we call a workers' agenda, the platform of demands consistent with the method outlined in Trotsky's transitional program, which was discussed here last week. It is exemplified in the NDP Socialist Caucus, Manifesto for a Socialist Canada, for instance. The class struggle opposition to the unions and NDP will be a vital source of future mass revolutionary workers' party in this country. The NDP will ever be a revolutionary party per se, but it's providing those seeds at the moment for working class organization. At present, our task is to address and challenge the favor of leadership in the NDP and the unions and a whole range of vital issues, from the struggle against national oppression to resistance against a corporate imperialist neoliberal agenda. So what is the alternative? Vital to the survival of past gains of the working class, vital to any progress on the programs that plague humanity on this planet, is the development of an organized opposition, the unions and the NDP, to the national chauvinist, anti-democratic, pro-capitalist, and concessionary stance of the current Labour NDP leadership. The notion that the present leaders, we hear this a lot, are pursuing a realistic course that can be implemented incrementally and gradually flies in the face of the facts. The bureaucrats' steady retreat before the rulers' offensive, their underestimation of advancing economic and environmental crisis, cry out for radical change. Radical action requires systematic organization, and the systematic organization of radicals does not occur spontaneously. Professional revolutionaries do not drop from the sky. It must be conscious and deliberate. So it brings us to the Revolutionary Socialist Party. Class struggle politics, internationalism, anti-bureaucratism, socialist policies, and transitional demands are not spontaneously articulated or advanced. The openings that occur for major radical change are usually brief. To make the most of such momentary opportunities requires a revolutionary organization. And revolutionary organization requires theory and practice. Theory without practice is barren, practice without theory is blind, as we've all heard before. Or as Trotsky put in his preface to the history of the Russian Revolution, I love this quote, without a guiding organization, the energy of the masses would dissipate like steam not enclosed in a piston box. But nevertheless, what moves the things is not the piston of the box, but the steam. The Revolutionary Workers' Party, even as a small seedling, unites theory and practice. The Revolutionary Party is a living memory of the working class and all the oppressed. It is a vital link to the future mass political vanguard and the class. If we wait until the revolutionary crisis to form such a party, history generally teaches us just to be too late. This requires organization. The opportunity for meaningful change will be squandered. Capitalist politicians, fake leftists, and skillful bureaucrats will fill the political vacuum and divert social struggles into a dead end. They will restabilize the system of exploitation, oppression, and war. How have they done it again and again? So thereupon lies the urgency of building a revolutionary organization now, not in the future. Not just to prepare for the final conflict, but to fight for the conquered gains in a way that empowers the disenfranchised and shatters the illusions in the capitalist order. So, why is the left divided? It's an age-old question. There's a lot of left revolutionary socialists, communists, different sort of left-wing groups, social democrat, radical social democrats. I don't know. This is the question so frequently asked. Why are we so divided? Why does the left not unite into one party transforming capitalist society? So with all such questions, the answer is rooted in history. It's rooted in the history of conflicting class interests. It's rooted in crucial political differences that have risen out of the experience of the workers' movement of the past century and a half. The triumph of the socialist revolution, which for the first time in class society brings the majority of humans to power, requires a workers' party and a workers' state to lead the transformation, overcome the resistance of an extremely privileged, powerful, and what is a ruthless minority. The transition to workers' power cannot be achieved spontaneously or in a decentralized fashion. This is due to the centralized nature of the existing class rule. In addition, the uneven development of nations, the desynchronized nature of class conflict worldwide impose a need for greater solidarity and stronger political organization of the dispossessed. Fundamental differences over questions of party and state led to two major splits in the workers' movement. The first was the split between Marxism and anarchism. Won't get into that. This largely had to do with major difference over the nature of the transition to construct a revolutionary political party, in a nutshell. Second major split occurred over reformism. Revolutionary socialists have always been in the forefront of the fight for reforms. That is evident in the Communist Manifesto of 1848. Reformism, however, is a doctrine of a gradual transition to socialism by relying on accumulation of reforms. Reformism is a theory that holds that basic problems of society can be solved, or even that socialism can be achieved by the gradual accumulation of reforms. It fosters illusions in the neutrality of the capitalist class as a vehicle of reform. Thus it subordinates workers, at least those who accept this illusion, to the preservation of the system and its state. Even today, many leftists have abandoned revolutionary theory and organization altogether. They stumble backwards to reformism. If you look at the rereadings of Karl Kautsky and his attempted revival by some sections on the North American left, I won't name who, that's part of the reason I think there's a good article lately. We need to throw Kautsky out with the bathwater, essentially. So the essence of revolutionary Marxist strategy is to combine the struggle for reforms with the struggle for revolution. This is the only way to build a revolutionary party capable of providing reliable leadership to the masses and of ending them and of enabling them in revolutionary situations to make the transition in consciousness and in action, from the struggle for reforms to the struggle for political power and revolutionary transformation of society. Canada is not now in a revolutionary situation. On the other hand, it is also true that there is a considerable social unrest, frustration, intense alienation, and the start of a sizable radicalization in this country, especially among young people, who provide the chief sources of revolution, as the polls show. Even though revolution is not on the agenda today, the development of a revolutionary strategy definitely is. But you can't develop one unless you take into account the way millions of independent independent working class people take to political action. Revolutionary Marxists are not opposed to the struggle for reforms. What we pose is reformism. Reformists push for reforms in a class collaborationist fashion, attempting to convince the exploited and oppressed masses that the system is reformable, that their interests and those of the exploiters and oppressed can be reconciled, and that class struggle should not be fought out to the logical conclusion. Revolutionaries, on the other hand, fight for reforms. But we don't stop teaching the truth about the inadequacy of reforms in and of themselves. As long as the ruling class is not removed from power, there will always be the threat that reforms gained will be cancelled or meaningless, formerly by the stroke of a pen, now more so by the stroke of a keyboard. Historical experience exposes the falsehood that capitalists will ever allow a peaceful transition to socialism. There are many examples. Countries like Chile, France, Jamaica, Indonesia, Grenada, Spain, and Greece, where recently a right-wing coalition has displaced the discredited Syriza-led government. Left-leaning government came in to fight back against the EU austerity and ended up managing it. So wherein the working classes come up against these pressures of the capitalist class, history has taught us numerous times that this has been the case. And then again, often in ways that severely weakened or sank these reform efforts. So the aspirations to produce socialism by evolutionary means, by peaceful elections, is always derailed by the capitalists through political manipulation, xenophobia, and nationalism. And when all else means have failed, violent counter-revolution in the form of fascism or what have you. But let's return to the original question. Why can't groups of the left unite around a common principle program? You can say one important reason is the low level of class struggle in the society. Higher level class struggle put many theories to test, much more rapidly. It helped to separate fact from fiction, and helped to accept correct ideas from wrong-headed ones. Unfortunately, socialists are compelled to work under existing conditions, not under those we might choose. We cannot afford to wait until the conditions are more to our liking, the people are hungry. That is, we really want to influence events in a revolutionary direction, ultimately, if we really want to win events and ultimately win power. Saying, we need to wait until people are hungry until they'll engage in real revolution, that's just not necessarily the case. Furthermore, we know that class struggle is an ongoing process worldwide. We know that revolution is an outcome of the ongoing process in specific circumstances. Socialists strive to advance a class struggle where we live and work and to mobilize support for workers' struggles, especially for revolutionary breakthroughs, whenever they occur. This is the approach of socialist action, linked pour l'action socialiste in the Canadian state. Excuse my French. SA is a democratic centralist political organization that stands on a revolutionary socialist program. SA is actively involved in a variety of political campaigns and a number of social movements, including human rights and end to poverty, for feminism, ecology. And we are especially active in solidarity with revolutionary Cuba, with movements of anti-imperialist resistance in Palestine and Venezuela, among others. Our primary orientation is to the working class and its labor and political institutions. SA is not only present in mass working class protests, we are actively involved in building a class struggle left-wing opposition to unions and inside the labor NDP. When shit hits the fan, it's going to be workers that look to those organizations, and it's going to be the work that potentially we have done beforehand that will lay the groundwork to take over those organizations, possibly form new ones, and continually scale up and continue to develop a revolutionary politics. We do not abstain from the NDP arena, nor do we adapt to the treacherous policies of their leaders. SA practices participation in the struggle for socialist policies and for a workers' agenda, as explained in the booklet, Prospects for Socialism in Canada. In other words, we are for conflictual participation. We're not cheerleaders for the NDP establishment. For instance, we utterly condemn the gross and racist treatment of Saren Gabalasai and her supporters in the recent Parkdale High Park federal NDP nomination meeting, which essentially shows we must double down our efforts to combat the revisionist right-wing bureaucracy. We're the backbone of the NDP Socialist Caucus. We helped force the removal of leader Tom Mulcair and to get to the NDP to adopt a cross-country discussion elite manifesto. For years, we've been pushing for pharmacare, dental care, for raising the minimum wage, for free tuition or post-secondary, mass construction of quality public housing, and for raising taxes on the wealthy. These ideas were adopted by the Ontario NDP and presented more or less effectively, although they backtracked when they got red-baited, during the June 7th provincial election. The Socialist Caucus has now built a base of over 1,000 members inside the NDP, and we have a national mass media profile. At the most recent provincial convention in Hamilton in June, the SC was in the forefront of demanding that socialist resolutions be given high priority on the agenda for discussion, or any priority for the agenda for discussion and vote. Our literature table attracted hundreds of people in attendance, despite the attempts by the bureaucrats to deny us the space. The SC is the only group that regularly produces a magazine espousing solidly socialist perspectives. Majority of the people at the convention, as usual, picked up a copy and are very receptive. And the Socialist Caucus was the only body that presented a slate of Socialist Caucus candidates for election and provincial executive of the party. I myself have ran for Ontario rep at a previous federal election. So, to be sure, the Socialist Caucus is not loved by the bureaucrats and reformists who run the party. Why? Because we stick to our principles, we refuse to be pushed around by the self-serving officials who run the NDP. However, remain open to working with like-minded groups and individuals, new and old, whether they agree with the SC manifesto or not, but to wish to advance a workers' agenda. We will not be diverted from this task. Yes, there are other groups out there, but none of them consistently present an alternative policy platform or a team of candidates that challenge the right-wing party establishment, much less target the toxic capitalist system. Having said that, a left united for particular aims is possible, and it'll be very powerful. Unity in action should be our common goal. The NDP Socialist Caucus is but one small part of the work of Socialist Action undertakes, and not all members are involved, but some are more active than others, but it is a general area of work we follow. But we have members across the country. In May, we hold our educational conference, which includes a convention for all members to decide matters of policy, campaigns, orientation, and to elect our leadership. We play a leading role in Palestinian liberation in Venezuela's and solidarity networks. We're one of the lead organizations behind the BDS Day of Action in April. We started the Workers' Action Movement, WAM, and OPSU in Region 5 on 5 key issues. Those being mobilize the membership to win, give more power and resources to our locals, no concessions bargaining, no more two-tier, fight the attacks on our wages, pensions, and benefits, create a more democratic, accountable, and transparent union, build it from the ground up, commit more resources from OPSU H2, and for solidarity with workers everywhere. Workers' Action Movement and SA have been at the forefront of calling for an emergency OFL convention to discuss strategies to defeat the Ford agenda, including mass action, up to including a general strike to bring down the Ford government before next election. Our resolution to this effect was passed by the Toronto York Region Labour Council, the details of which you can read about at thewham.ca. SA members pay monthly dues, sell the newspaper, attend meetings on a regular basis. A new member's path through a provisional membership period of 3 months duration to determine their suitability for full membership. We place a high priority in education, both internally and externally, like events like these we hold. We practice democracy in discussion and unity in action. All members, including leaders, are duty-bound to carry out the adopted policies of the organization, unlike Labour and NDP leaders who often disregard convention decisions in favor of their own personal positions. We practice what we preach. And we preach what we practice. That should be enough to shine a beacon of light and hope on a tormented and cynical world. As I said in the beginning tonight, Socialism in the Park is a course for those who want to gain a better understanding in the world. Socialist Action is an organization for those who want not just to understand the world, but to change it. I say it's for people who want to replace the tyranny of capitalist minority rule with the immensely creative potential of a democratic, cooperative Commonwealth. I was going to say, if you agree, join Socialist Action today, but I do want to end with a quote by Trotsky, where I think speaking to a medical science group after the Russian Revolution, he said, "The bourgeoisie and the working class are thus located on the soil in which renders our victory inescapable. Not in the astronomical sense, of course, not inescapable like the setting or rising in the sun, but inescapable in the historical sense, in the sense that unless we gain victory, all society, all human culture are doomed." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, so before we get into before I take questions, I'm just going to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I encourage you all to buy Socialist Action June edition of Socialist Action newspaper. It's $2. Talk to any member of Socialist Action or Judy at the table. It's got lots of great articles. Covering the many women's right to choice on abortion, the general strike that's going on in Sudan, the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall uprisings, why Zionists are in a panic, and how do you think Doug forward? Also, as I mentioned, the literature table's over there, lots of great stuff. There's 2 new booklets out from SA, The Hell That Is Haiti, and Hands Off Venezuela. So I encourage you to take a look at those. A couple of events coming up is this Saturday, July 13th. Come join us here at Christie Pitts Park for the Convergence for a Green New Deal. And this also the Social Action candidate will be here. Also coming up, towards the end of August, the annual Social Action Picnic and membership meeting will take place on Saturday, August 31st at the Vane Avenue Co-op near Danforth and Logan. And then also get ready for Toronto's annual Labor Day Parade on Monday, September 2nd. Plan to meet at Queen Street West and University Avenue at 9 a.m. on Monday, September 2nd. Okay, those are all the announcements I have for today. Does anyone else have any announcements before we start the question? Any other announcements from the floor? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, so now it's time for your questions and comments. We will try to have a gender-balanced list. So raise your hand if you wish to speak, and please limit your remarks to about 3 minutes. And then we'll go back to Sam to respond to this. So do we have any questions or comments from the floor? Anybody? Yeah. And you can get up and use the mic, or you can ask for standing where you're sitting.
First of all, very good job. Thank you. I was wondering if you can explain kind of more what had to do with Saron Gabriel-Selassie and what we kind of plan to do to try to curb any of that kind of happening again. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the floor? Barry?
Well, good evening, everyone. Another wonderful discussion in a beautiful setting here in the park. My name is Barry Weisletter. I'm one of the editors of Socialist Action newspaper and the Federal Secretary of Socialist Action. So what is socialism? Well, in some ways, we already have it. There are the seeds of socialism planted in our midst as a result of nearly 2 centuries of working class struggle. What do I mean by the seeds of socialism? Public schools, social housing, public hospitals, roads. You know, under feudalism, in order to travel a road from one end of the country to the other, you have to pay tariffs all along the way. Now we have that in Highway 407, but we don't have it generally established, and let's hope it never develops in that direction. Sewers, public health, firefighters. How many of you have seen the movie Gangs of New York? Do you remember the scene where there's a fire and these fire trucks, you know, with big barrels of water rush to the scene and they stop and do nothing because the owner of the building didn't have fire insurance and it wasn't a public service, so they stood there and watched the building burn down, only providing a little lubrication to the adjoining property so that it wouldn't spread. So we have public firefighting. We have a postal service, which is under attack. We have environmental regulation, which is totally inadequate, but better than none at all. We have building standards. You can't just construct a building without meeting certain standards, although the standards are being eviscerated, and the working conditions for construction workers are under attack. We have Ontario Hydro, although partly privatized, still represents the backbone of our hydroelectric grid. So these are examples of the seeds of socialism. These are the examples of the incursion on private property rights that worker struggles have made. And these are positive gains that should be defended. But these instances of public service are not democratically run. not democratically managed. The CEOs are often receiving 6- and 7-figure salaries. And these concessions by capital do not constitute an integrated alternative system. The system is not planned. It's chaotic, and these examples I gave, and there are many, many others, simply try to fill the gaps where they're most evident. Now, some people will argue that highly evolved welfare states, like those in Scandinavia, Sweden for example, are socialist societies. I want to argue that this is false on many levels. Number one, big capital still dominates the Swedish economy, the economy in Norway and Denmark, the Scandinavian countries, and all countries like those. Even in South India, which is a rather evolved welfare state. Big capital dominates through corporations like Volvo, IKEA, mining corporations, banks that operate on a world scale. Number two, pro-labor and social welfare reforms can be easily reversed by the stroke of a pen or the tapping of a keyboard, as Sam said. Number three, the economy, even under these conditions, with many public services in place, is subject to the ups and downs of the capitalist business cycle. The decline in the rate of profit, which is a universal tendency under capitalism, drives austerity, it drives wars of conquest, and it drives the plunder of the environment, which threatens the very survival of humanity. Real socialism is an integrated system. It breaks the logic of the market. It replaces the profit drive with the maximization of human progress and the human interest. Real socialism is the common ownership of the commanding heights of the economy with democratic planning by workers and their communities. A planned economy is the only way to harness the resources and technology necessary to shift rapidly from the carbon economy to a green energy system. Our present energy structure will take trillions of dollars to shift from carbon to sustainable energy, green energy. This won't happen in accordance with a decision by any one corporation or any one government in the market system. It requires a plan of action that will be sweeping and spectacular in character, and we have very little time to effect it before catastrophic climate change is irreversible. And finally, a planned economy is the only realistic alternative to the capitalist gig economy. I think you're familiar with that term, the gig economy. It's all about precarious work. There's a very interesting interview that was published in the Toronto Star with the former Unifor chief economist, Jim Stanford, in which he argues that the gig economy is a choice. It's not inevitable, and it's certainly not desirable. And I just want to quote from this article briefly. We have signed trade agreements, says Jim Stanford, that allow General Motors to shut down Oshawa, produce exactly the same vehicles in Mexico and sell them back to Canada without any tariffs or obligation. So in that framework, why would GM do anything different? That decision was not driven by technology. It's the same technology. That decision was not driven by electric vehicles or any of these other innovations, not remotely. They're exactly the same cars being produced in Mexico and will be sold in Canada. So we have organized the economy in a way that gives employers, whether it's Uber and the digital platforms or General Motors and more traditional manufacturing, the power to unilaterally determine where people are going to be employed, how they're going to be employed, and how much they're being paid to do it. The only realistic alternative to this gig economy, which is leaving many, many working people impoverished and not knowing where the next paycheck is coming from, wondering whether they'll be able to raise their kids, keep a roof over their head, keep food on the table. The only alternative to that is what the Uber workers are doing by joining the UFCW. It's what the Foodora workers are doing by joining the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. And it's what you should be doing by joining Socialist Action, because we're fighting for a planned economy where profit comes second to human needs, where working people are in control. We can plan an economy and eliminate the wars of conquest and the plunder of our planet so that we can nurture and develop human civilization so we can reach out to the stars after we solve the problems here on Earth. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments from the floor? Anybody? Yeah.
One thing about what happened to Chevron and Garbolesi is it relates to all this other stuff too. It's the media. The media is a major thing.
Yeah, on that note, we actually met someone who ran for mayor of Toronto who spoke at Rebel Films, and he was a pretty prominent lawyer out of Brampton, a civil defense lawyer who does tons of pro bono work, and was very, very well covered in the media before the election. But as soon as he announced he was running for the election, he got blacked out by all the media. And so I'm sure you never even heard of him. His last name is Singh. I can't remember his first name, but yeah. So the media really determines, I guess, what you hear and sort of what what ideas you can have. It's kind of the. I'll just take a moment to make my own comment, I guess. The sort of neoliberal ideology that that these are the arguments. This is the threshold of where you can debate. This is the discussion that's going on. This is left wing. This is right wing. This is the New Democratic Party. This is the Conservative Party. This is the Liberal Party. There's nothing really outside of that, or the media so would have you believe, right? And I'm sure a lot of you can understand that or feel that way. And it's not just to do with politics. It's to do with any part of interaction or society or the environment. It's all framed. It's all put in front of us in a certain way. And anyway, so I want to think about that, and I'll give it to Judy because she has a comment.
Socialist action was the group that started feminism in Canada and also around the world. It started the second wave of feminism in Canada. It also started gay liberation in Canada. And it had a lot to do with, well, the gifts didn't really have a lot to do with the national question, but it did say that Quebec has to be united with Canada to make a revolution. Quebec has the right to self-determination. It wants to decide for itself what it wants to do. If it wants to separate from Canada, and if the native people want to separate from Canada, they can do that. It's only really that socialist action that has these ideas. No other group on the left really has it. And not to the extent that we do.
Thank you, Judy. Ty? Well, Sam, are you okay?
Yeah.
Wait, go ahead, Ty.
Hi there, my name's Tynan. I'm QP Local 2 TTC electrical worker. We're a small union of electrical trades at the TTC, and I'm a communist. And I wanted to say that just recently our union adopted a position for free public transit. As well as for province-wide strike action and protests to bring down the Ford regime. This guy's approval ratings are in the dumps, but that does not mean he's not dangerous. And what's being pushed by the top labor leadership right now is that we wait it out. That we wait till the federal election in October, or wait another 3 years for a provincial election to put their NDP in power. And what's going to be left of this province in 3 years if the only strategy is just to elect the NDP, which frankly is not very different in practice from the Liberals and the Conservatives. Fighting for this in my union, actually the night before the meeting, I got some really good advice from one of the cadre from Socialist Action, Liz Bice. She's not here, but I really appreciated that. Made it a lot easier to focus my thoughts and help mobilize the membership. I am, however, not a member of Socialist Action, and it's important. Well, we'll see. We gotta have the clarifying discussion. So it's, when you talk about making revolution in Canada, that's where the rubber hits the road. That's the most practical questions where they get posed, and that's necessarily where the disputes lie. So just, if we're going to make a revolution in this country, we need to know that it's revolutionary history. And the real shot at a revolution in this country was actually, I'm not sure if we've heard of it here, it was the Patriot Rebellion in 1837 and 1838. It was a revolt in what's now known as Quebec. And there's not a lot of industry back then. It was farmers and builders and craftsmen who rose up to resist. It was an upheaval of Francophone resistance to British colonial rule. And it had a faint echo in Toronto as well. The other big revolutionary situation in this country was also in Quebec. It was between 1970 and 1972. We hear it here as the FLQ crisis, but that's the government wants to blame the militants and the revolutionaries. If anything, it's a Trudeau crisis when he sent in the military to occupy Quebec. And when a statement was read over the CBC saying, naming the names of prominent capitalists guilty of exploiting workers and saying that they should be confronted with an army of 100,000 armed workers in the streets, there was that was read over the CBC as part of the hostage crisis, when the CBC went around interviewing people after to ask what they thought of it. Most people in Quebec said it was pretty good. And then in 1972 there was a general strike that shut down entire towns. You turn on the radio, it was union propaganda. The workers had taken over the stations. So that was in 1970 to 72 in Quebec. And the question is, why didn't it spread here? And the thing is, the leadership of the English-Canadian unions was dead opposed. Why? Doesn't that sound crazy? Why would a leader of a union oppose a general strike? Well, the reason's political. It's because the sharp rebellion in Quebec was driven by sentiment for sovereignty. These people, these workers, were resisting assimilation and exploitation by Anglo-American capital, and the conditions where the saying was capital speaks English and labor speaks French. Now it might be your immediate boss or the owner speaks French, but still the big banks and whatnot are English. They're entirely intertwined with Anglo-American finance capital across North America. And that's why Quebec independence is the strategic question of workers' revolution in this country. It's not just a question of, well, if they want to, let's let them. No, that's an efficacious way to smash the Canadian state, rip a big hole in the Crown Confederation, and harness the just struggle of an oppressed nation to bring the working class to power. So I guess it's interesting, throughout the presentation, the NDP was routinely referred to as a workers' party. But why is it that the place in this country where the unions are the biggest, the most militant, and the best organized, the NDP has no union base? It's because it's so hostile to Quebec independence that it even supports the monarchy. So if you want to build a legit workers' party in this country, the whole lesson of its revolutionary history is it's necessary to support that Francophone resistance as part of the struggle for the freedom of all oppressed racial minorities, immigrants, natives, as well as for women, gay people, and anyone who's oppressed by capitalism. Quebec independence is part and parcel with all of that. And I guess what I wanted to ask is a question, or it's a criticism and a question, is I listened very carefully to Sam's presentation, and he said, we're in the NDP, but we don't hide our politics. We don't pull any punches. Was it controversial or conflicting participation?
Conflictual participation.
Right,
yeah.
so the Socialist Action has a position on paper of advocacy of Quebec independence, correct?
Certainly.
Okay, because your speaker said it was merely for... Yeah, so why is it that I read your whole magazine, and I read through tons of your resolutions and whatnot, and there's nothing at all on the independence of Quebec? Because it's an extremely controversial issue in this country, and the NDP's opposition to it has tanked and sunk a revolutionary situation, and it will again, unless we organize consciously on that basis.
Speaker, but I'm going to come back to Sam and then we'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Get all in.
All right, sure. Lee?
No, I'll respond. I'll include my response to this.
Yeah. So a couple things. Someone asked me about Well, first, Ty had probably the most interesting comments out of that, so I'll talk about that first. I mean, Quebec independence, yeah, we support all national liberation movements and extend solidarity to all facets of movements for national liberation, independence movement that can throw off the yoke of their overarching, whatever it's Catalan independence or Scottish independence or independence of Palestine from the Israeli apartheid state, democratization of Palestine. The Quebec question, yeah, it is a fundamental issue to Canadian working class politics, and there is that divide, but the historic two solitudes that we encounter, and how to bridge that is a crucial question, and looking at what possibilities there are for solidarities to exist, and what type of movements concerning the Quebec question, national question, do we work to organize? Now, Socialist Action is attempting to organize a presence in Quebec that is steadily growing, and that definitely provides, I don't want to say a left nationalism, but freedom for Quebec independence unequivocally as their fundamental right to secede from the Canadian state. It's an interesting question on how it affects our organizational work in English Canada and here, and is that something that we lead with to workers, that we organize around, or do we support generally, right? And what is its usefulness as an organizational tool, right? I mean, fundamentally, from past essay resolutions, we've stated that rebuilding the left is a task at hand. Well, what does that mean if you're not building a class struggle left wing inside the unions and the NDP, the working class organization? So socialism without the working class is impossible. The socialist left, which is outside of the unions and the NDP, is not necessarily a decisive force. It can demonstrate tactical leadership on specific issues, but it's separated from the masses forces that it needs to become the majority, capable of transforming capitalist society, in essence becoming the vanguard. In saying that, the whole NDP leadership should be replaced by socialists. For that to occur, a much bigger movement for radical change within the NDP and the labor movement must be built. And such a movement is essentially called a class struggle left wing. So it's based on a concrete program that speaks to the needs of working people without fear of incurring the wrath of capital, and it puts people before profits. It puts democracy before big property. But I don't dispute necessarily most of what you said there on the Quebec issue and their right to self-determination. I mean, we as Trotskyists, our branch, I mean, national liberation movements, as I said, our nations have the right to protect themselves against imperialism. And if I take it another level, I mean, Assad is a butcher and he's not someone that we should support, but he has the right to ask for Russian assistance against U.S. intervention, right? And we shouldn't support people like the White Helmets or any type of intervention in oppressed nationalities, even if whether they're led by religious fanatics or bourgeois reformists. They have a right to throw off the yoke, and it's for those people to settle their accounts. And if with the ruling class, and if the Quebec workers, the Quebec working class decides to settle those accounts with break from English Canada, that's something we wholeheartedly support. Saron's situation, to double back, voter suppression, papers lost. She had 400 members signed up, and she submitted the forms 1 month prior before the vote. Subsequently, at the vote, there was only a fraction of her supporters that were recognized. There's a good article in Now magazine, but part of it I'll just quote. It was a stressful, painful, and humiliating experience for new party members, many of who came to participate in the Canadian political process for the first time. Some voters were turned away because they were not on the list. Young families with children, elderly people, shift workers, and other Gabriel Essay supporters stood in line for as long as 2 hours waiting to cast ballots. So, I mean, it speaks to the rot in the party, but also the potentialities for an organized left wing to make further gains as we're the base of the working classes. And like I said, it's like I think I mentioned in the presentation. I mean, the NDP is never going to be a revolutionary party per se, but until we get expelled, we're going to organize within there and continue to develop a class struggle left wing and present people with socialist ideas and policies and positions. And if they expel us, so be it. And that'll just prove that we're being more effective. But until that day, we're going to continue to work until, you get some sort of language change, whether it's, some sort of Corbyn style left wing push, or in the NDP, even like a Bernie's like political revolution against the billionaire class would be left wing. The NDP bureaucracy is terrified of Corbyn phenomenon and even Bernie, but the NDP is still fundamentally supported by the unemployed, radical activists, union members, people of the working class, and the NDP bureaucracy, while they dislike that, they derive their social privileges from there. So it's a delicate dance that they do, and it's something that, with the advent of more revolutionary situation, could explode on them and present new opportunities for us. And anyway, I encourage people to go to Now Toronto and read that article on Sharon's nomination meeting, because it was quite wild, and there was an interesting pushback from the kind of NDP bureaucrats on Facebook, cheerleaders kind of talking about how this was a false flag to allow Saron to claim this sort of treatment, and she purposely kind of tanked her campaign, which is pretty disgusting. The nightmarish gig economy. Yeah, I mean, the unionization of Foodora workers through Food Stores United via the Cup W. That's a very important task to the labor movement. It's going to be very interesting to see how that goes about over the summer. And it's one of the ways forward that workers can push back against this certain very violent casualization of work. I believe there's even standalone retail stores now that can hire in shift workers for the evening. So unionization, organization for workers is an important way for workers to insulate themselves from grotesque pauperism and decay until the next revolutionary upsurge. And the continual winning of gains and the scaling up of gains. I mean, every small victory can become a road and a path to realize new potentialities and kind of realize new gains. And eventually corporate transitional demands. I mean, the OPSU Executive Board silently passed a 30 for 40 resolution, and I talk about it with people in the workplace, and they're like, holy shit, like that would be, 30 hours, no loss of pay, full-time wages and benefits on 30 hours, shortening the work week, right? And why wouldn't we shorten the work week? You're getting the automation and you're getting more automation and more technology in the workplace, and with that process, the bosses are, instead of providing full-time jobs and shortening the work week, they're laying off workers for self-checkout cash registers. Well, we shouldn't allow the capitalist class of bosses to benefit in that sense by displacing workers from new technology. We need to fundamentally create new ideas around how do workers benefit from that new technology, right? In concrete ways. Someone spoke about media narratives, independent. I mean, media narratives. Gramsci spoke about the base and the superstructure. Why the revolution wasn't possible in certain areas, like in his time in Italian prison under Mussolini. There is that superstructure involved that keeps the base in check. You have your lawyers and your doctors and your kind of media framework, not to shit on doctors, we need those. Kind of media overarching superstructure that keeps narratives in control and can kind of stymie consent and quell protests and reinforce the establishment view of things. I mean, answer that is independent working class politics and independent workers organizations. We see seedlings of that with various groups. SA is at the forefront of that, creating, a newspaper or putting up posters and buttons or spray painting our logo through stencils, just doing anything to try and get a different narrative out there, but allowing people to know there is organizations that see all the shiny glitter that's out there and say that's nice, but we have a completely frigging different approach. And here's why. And if you listen to our points, we think that if not be convinced, you'll at least feel a little bit sad in your views and what you believe, right? I find a lot of conversations with people. I'm very right-wingers or social Dems who are questioning themselves. Usually from those conversations, I will get enlightened by their counterpoints or what they've internalized, and they'll come away feeling sort of upset and sad, I find. In that, there's an incompatibility with the certain views of the establishment and the legitimacy of it with the concrete facts of the situation. Very quickly, nationalism, bad, right? I don't even know where I think Judy, you're something about nationalism, but the ties into the Quebec question and the national self-determination and not having a nationalist outlook, not having a left nationalist outlook, but an internationalist outlook. I don't even think we don't really have a lot of the elements that have decayed within the the NDP, social democratic bureaucracy and unions. They don't really even have a left nationalist outlook per se anymore. They don't even really advocate against free trade programs per se. But internationalism is, on our small little blue planet in the middle of space, how could you not be an internationalist, right? Ford's approval rating, tiger in the corner, right? This is someone that has been tanking in the polls. I don't know. I don't know if Labour can really take any credit for that per se. The other week, Smokey backed off on protesting Ford Fest. I didn't even really hear they planned to protest Ford Fest in the first place, but backing off on it, some sort of liability involved in there. I'm not sure. And I think I had something on the Clarity Act, which the NDP half-heartedly supports. They're a little more wishy-washy on the question. There is a tactic kind of support there. I'm doubling back now, but these are just some right now. For Quebec's ability to choose to be independent, and they've come under a lot of fire for this in the bourgeois media, the bourgeois press. It's certainly, they're not as, people like Tom Auclair aren't necessarily, haven't taken views all the way, so someone like Chrétien or Trudeau in their abject insistence on Quebec domination. So there is, I'm not advocating for Mulcair, but there is a little bit of nuance in that question. I'm not saying that's because they're principled, but just because there is that sentiment among the base that there is what's the word I'm looking for? There's an opening for discussions about self-determination, and there's a lot of elements of the NDP are less doggedly nationalist, being the Workers' Party and having more left-wing activists. I think that's all.
Mamadi?
Okay, I love you all. I'm bringing this over love. I'm going to tell you something. You're all crazy. We're doing organizing the same way over and over again, and we're not getting a different result. The same people are always coming in.
That's not true.
Well, just give me my space here, because we got a whole lot of people in the world. This goes to my workshop again. It's about organizing, and you want to get someone to be part of this. You ask them, you get that they have needs that you have. If you approach them with an intellectual lecture about Marxism. They're not going to really want to hear that. They want to hear that you hear them and you kind of can empathize and have compassion for their pain. And you want to say, well, let's have coffee. The revolution starts at the kitchen table, okay? It really does. The big work in Caledonia around the building in the Caledonian land started with the clan mothers. They heard it was going on and the men were going to do their thing. And the clan mothers said, we're going to have a dinner and a potluck and they're not welcome. But they said that strategically to the youth who were really into working with the clan mothers and were tired of seeing what was going on with the male leadership that was sort of top-down and AFN oriented. So they told the youth this, and the youth went on to spread it around, and the male leadership heard about this and said, we want to come. And the clan mothers said, well, you can come, but these are the conditions. You sit behind us and you listen, because there's other ways of doing things. Those other ways is capitalism at heart, is a system built on scarcity and the conflict. All conflict arises from the failure to have needs met. And if you can't understand that the person who is that if you're having a conflict with somebody, but you're apparently on the same side, the first thing is they need to know that they're being heard. And from there, you start, what I do when I don't get trolled, but on Twitter is, I'll get something like that, somebody will say something, and I'll say, hey, you seem really angry, you want to tell me why? I don't say, well, it's because capitalism has done this and this and this. Sorry, Barry, I got to do this because I'm putting my energy and my soul into this, and I'm tired of the same thing over and over again. We need to meet to support each other, but you know what? If we want to grow and really get people to get that capitalism is the problem, we got to speak to their hearts, and we got to acknowledge that they have needs. And we have to acknowledge that that first need is being heard. So they're heard, and they say, have a coffee. Well, okay, so we have this great analysis. This caucus should be about educating people about the material consequences of the capitalist system, so that when they say, well, I don't have my job because, and then you can talk about globalization. But you don't go right to globalization and all that before they trust you and think that you're interested in them. And that's the problem. We're no less top down in the way this caucus is organized. And I love you, Barry. I really do. Because you didn't, I came to this caucus 20 years ago and I was saying things that were not heard. Now they're heard. Eco-socialism, feminism, workers' powers. I'm Cree. My people have been the canaries in the coal mines of environmental degradation for 120 years. Nobody listened to us. We were told what we needed to do. We were told we needed this. No. What we needed you to do is to understand that our cultures are a need fulfillment, gift economies. When our people starve, our leaders starve with us. This is what Engels didn't get in his observations about the place of women. Economics is the management of the household, right? That's what it means. That's the root. And so when we start looking after those things with each other, we stop fighting with each other, then there's potential for the mass movement. And we support each other. That means the people in this group here that have nice union jobs who want people like me to come out, do what Corey does. You buy me a beer, you fix me a dinner. You want me to play music? I played music for 45 years to get to the point where I can do that. You got to share. We shared everything. It's a gift economy based on providing for need versus capitalism. It's an economy of accumulation. Now, I go into a lot of detail of this, and then we actually, in the workshop, we do role playing, where you are engaging with somebody who's really angry, and you want to make them an ally. Well, you don't go here. What you do is you go here. And this is the decolonizing heart. This is the skill that we've lost in Western culture split of the mind and the body and the soul and the spirit. Marx was a very spiritual person. He really was. That's what gave him the courage to do the work he did. Anyway, that's what I wanted to say. That's what you need to start doing.
Can't buy everyone beer.
Why not?
Until we nationalize the beer, until we get it. Yeah. Maybe I could. We'll see. I don't know. Anyways, any other comments or questions from the floor? Seeing none, I'll.
Can I?
Yeah, of course.
Briefly?
Yeah.
Hey everybody, my name is Eurydice. Nice to meet you all. There's some people here I know, there's lots of people I don't know. I could notice two things. There are a few people here that are older than I, and there's a lot of people here that are younger than me are. This being like this, and I come from where I come, we have a different experience. I grew up into a military dictatorship when I was young, and in Brazil, yes. I fought to change things in my country, Brazil, and eventually we did, and eventually I see it again. After a change, I see it again in the hands of the worst kind of people. But and this is really annoying for me. But there is another thing that when I look at my country, Brazil, and when I think of Toronto, and when I think of Canada, I see that what is happening in Brazil is not happening in Brazil. This is happening in the world. This is happening in Canada, specifically in Ontario. This is happening in the United States. It's happening in Hungary and in Italy. So it is a peculiar moment in the world. I used to think that time was a straight thing that you get better with time. With age, I got to find out that you don't really you not necessarily evolve with time. You can evolve and then you can kind of devolve. The reason I'm talking here all this kind of loose stuff is because Mama D said that the revolution or the discussion starts in the kitchen table. I agree. Like I come here and I see people talking about revolution. Before, revolution is a word that is with me since I was 17 or even before, since I was a child really, because that was something we longed for in Brazil. But people say revolution, and we really are, what is revolution? The revolution, and what is revolution? Revolution is to revolve, it is to change, it is to think, to take things upside down. And I think this is a very important thing, because if you're going to live here, I don't know how committed you are, if you are students in the university and you know stuff, you know, I don't know who you are really, but if you're going to live here and think you're going to change something, you really have to bring it down from the highs of theory. I spent all my life trying to do that, bringing stuff from the highs of sociology, anthropology, talking about Marx and Trotsky, for more than I like Marx and Trotsky specifically. But you know, it's down here. It's what we are. And Mama D said other thing that I think it's important. It is how we see the other. The Toronto that I see now is very different of the Toronto I saw when I got here 20 years ago under Mike Harris. It's worse now. There's more poor people, there's more homelessness, there's more difficulty in finding a place to live, in getting a proper job. I have a 20-year-old daughter. I don't know what the hell is she gonna do with her life. Like what kind of job she's gonna get. She lives in the basement. and pays $1,250. So, oh, you can hear.
You're standing in front of the speaker.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I hope you heard what I said. Anyway, I just hope I don't wanna get myself talking a lot. I just would like that since you guys are here and you come here to talk about socialism, that you didn't come just to talk, that you get together with other people that are interested in change, that you get together, that you find a way of doing something with other people and try to change that. I do that by working with tenants. I'm lucky, I have a job that pays me to do activism. I know not everybody is that lucky, but I hope that each one of you, the ones that are not older than I, because those probably already did lots of stuff, the ones that are younger than I, or are my age, I hope that you're going to find a way of getting together with other people that think like you and change stuff. Because talking about socialism is just not enough. We got to do socialism.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the floor? Any first-time questions or comments before I go to a second-time speaker? No? Okay, I'll let Barry finish that before I go back to second.
Just a quick comment. Basically, I agreed with everything that Eurydice and Mamadi said, even though they think that perhaps that's not the case. Let me give you an example. My partner of 30 years is a retired postal worker. I met her as a postal worker. She was leading a campaign called Struggle 88. It was about defending jobs against ruthless automation and reducing postal services. Postal workers live and work some of the harshest conditions in the federal public service. They have the highest accident rate. That's what they talk about. That's what we talk about. Okay. So last fall, the postal workers were engaged in a struggle for a decent contract to defend jobs and to defend our postal service and to implement electric fleet of vehicles to make the green energy shift. But Justin Trudeau said, this is an indispensable service. Oh, suddenly it's indispensable? That's why they pay them so well and give them shitty conditions? At Christmas time. It's an indispensable service in October, November, never mind Christmas time. So you can't strike, and we pass a law in Parliament to say you cannot strike. No rotating strikes. So what did we do? Did we go to postal workers and talk about socialism and revolutionary change and the need for a worldwide workers' republic? No. We went to the picket lines. We organized hundreds of people to shut down the Gateway plant up near Pearson and the South Central plant down on Eastern Avenue because we said the postal workers have the right to strike. We're going to defend the right to strike. Every worker should have the right to strike. And we're here to defend democratic workers' rights on the job and in the community. That's what we did. And you go through these experiences when you're fighting a bad landlord and horrendous conditions in Toronto housing, when you're dealing with, on the construction site, situations where workers are at risk, their lives are at risk, and the bosses are saying, oh, you got a 36-hour week? We want you to work a 40-hour week and with no increase in pay. And we're going to increase the number of journeymen on the jobs, and some of them won't even be supervised. And they may end up crippled or dead. That's what we're talking about. Grassroots, basic, fundamental issues. But there's a time when you need to generalize from those elementary experiences, and that's called political theory. When you understand why the bosses take away the right to strike, why they're trying to get you to work longer hours, unsafe working conditions for the same rotten pay, when you understand why the housing stock is deteriorating, and there's overcrowding and poor transportation, and the city is beginning to crumble at the edges right down to the center, you then begin to need to explain the class nature of the state, the fundamental nature of the capitalist economy with its up and down business cycle, which turns working people into mincemeat. That's why you have to talk about wars of conquest and why that is an expression of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, the generalization of these elementary experiences. So there's a place for basic experience and there's a place for political theory. And if you don't have both, you'll never develop a strategy to escape the treadmill of the rotten capitalist system. You need to have both, and that's what we're committed to. And the final comment is about the NDP and the national question. The reason why you don't see demands for Quebec independence or solidarity with Quebec's right to self-determination in every edition of our newspaper or magazine is because the Quebec nationalist movement, much to my dismay, has been in retreat for 25 years. And you can't suck a movement out of your thumb. You have to deal with real situations, right? So, you know, they say a broken clock is correct twice a day. You just wait until it reaches the same old time. We don't subscribe to the broken clock theory. We think that our ideas have to be moving in relation to real political dynamics. And when the Catalan masses fought for independence from Spain, we were the first to organize a picket at the Spanish embassy in this city to defend Catalonia's right to self-determination. And when the Quebec national movement rises again, we'll be the first to stand up for its right to self-determination, without a doubt. And we'll be asking the NDP and the unions and all of the rest of the left to come together around that fundamental principle of workers' democracy. But we cannot, by ourselves, reverse a downturn. And the reason why the Quebec sovereignty movement was in retreat is because of the experience of two Parti Québécois governments, which implemented austerity, which forced students in their hundreds of thousands into strike action in the streets. Right? So they have a hurdle to overcome, and we'll be there ready to organize solidarity with their struggle for sovereignty. And as far as the NDP is concerned, it's rotten to the core. Its leadership is pro-capitalist, there's no doubt, but so is the labor movement. And comrade, you participate in unions, and we all do. Despite the rotten leadership and the ineptitude and the corruption and the backward policies of our unions. And that's because we refuse to be marginalized. We think our ideas are relevant to the real experiences of working people on a day-to-day basis and the need to transform our unions into instruments of class struggle. And if you're not in the unions, and if you're not in the party that's based on the unions, brother, you're nowhere, you're marginal, you're not part of the debate, you can't move masses, and you can't even hone a program for revolutionary transformation. That's essential. Praxis, theory and practice.
I'm going to give people an opportunity for a second round because I think that